Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, one of the programmers for DocLands, and I want to welcome you to DocLands and to this Q&A for Augmented, directed by Matthew Orr. I want to thank our supporters of the festival, our sponsors, our California Film Institute members, and of course, you, our audience. We're thrilled to bring you the world premiere of Augmented, and just as thrilled to have with us today the film's director, Matthew Orr, producer, Gideon Gill, and scientist and star of the film, Hugh Herr. Before we get started, a few words of introduction about our guests. Matthew Orr is a professor of journalism at the Medill School for Journalism at Northwestern University. Previously, he was director for multimedia and creative at statnews.com in Boston, a journalism site covering health, medicine, and life sciences. He's an award-winning filmmaker and journalist with nearly 20 years of experience in video production. Before joining STAT, Orr worked at the New York Times as a senior video producer and as the organization's first full-time staff video journalist. Gideon Gill is a STAT managing editor overseeing STAT's investigative journalism and special projects. He previously was the Boston Globe's health and science editor for a decade and had a hand in 3 Pulitzer Prizes: a 2014-15 Knight Science Journalism Fellow at MIT. Gideon earned a biochemistry degree from Harvard College and a master's in journalism from Columbia University. Finally, Hugh Herr, who heads the biomechatronics group at the MIT Media Lab, is creating bionic limbs that emulate the function of natural limbs. In 2011, Time magazine coined Hugh the, quote, leader of the bionic age, unquote, because of his revolutionary work in the emerging field of biomechatronics, technology that marries human physiology with electromechanics. Hugh is the author and co-author of more than 150 peer-reviewed papers and patents, chronicling the science and technology behind his many innovations. As you saw from the film, he has designed his own bionic limbs, the world's first bionic lower leg, called the Empower Ankle System. Hugh has received many accolades for his groundbreaking innovations. Welcome to the 3 of you. Thanks so much for being here, and I can't wait to get started.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Hugh, I want to start with you if I can, please. Since we just quoted that Time magazine statement calling you the leader of the bionic age, can you just state for us, maybe just for me, who's science challenged, the distinction between cyborg and bionic, and if there is sort of a significant distinction to make as it concerns the work that you're doing in these devices?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do so. So Hollywood has taken the word bionic and cyborg and used them over and over. So it's challenging to come up with a general consensus for their definitions. So I'll provide my definition. So bionic is typically the use of electromechanics, synthetic materials to emulate a natural function. So human bionics, the natural function would be the function of the biological human body. So it's emulation. So for example, my Empower foot ankle bionic limbs, one could say they're bionic for walking. They emulate natural dynamics when I walk compared to a person with biological limbs. The word cyborg really doesn't suggest an emulation between electromechanics and the biological body. Instead, it suggests a relationship between the two. In cyborg, there's a bidirectionality between human computation within the nervous system and the computation of the electromechanic device, wherein a person can think and affect the electromechanical device, and the electromechanical device computation can actually inform changes to the nervous system. So that closed loop behavior is how I defined a cyborg human-machine interaction. I know that's a bit technical, but
no, that actually is extremely helpful. Thank you, appreciate that. And it's clear, from the film how that works with what you're doing in the lab and with the devices that you guys are creating. Matt, I want to head over to you and just ask you, how you first came to know Hugh and his work.
Yeah, I would say that the idea for creating this documentary came initially from an article in the Boston Globe. In fact, Gideon spotted the article. I guess this was 2016. I'm starting to forget the years here now, in which it was reported that Hugh and Dr. Carty had taken this new novel approach to amputation, and they had just successfully concluded the operation for the very first patient, Jim Ewing, who's also obviously featured in the film. So we were sort of blown away by this news report, and Gideon had the very smart idea of why don't we just sort of reach out to Hugh and to Dr. Carty and see if we might be able to gain some access to go a little bit behind the scenes and capture video of Jim Ewing, patient 0, being brought into the MIT lab to be tested out on these new mechatronic devices with this new amputation concluded. So we pitched the idea, and it took a little bit of time, but Hugh ultimately said yes, as did Dr. Carty, and we were off and running. At that point, I and my colleague Dom Smith spent quite a bit of time every month visiting the lab at MIT when Jim was coming in, and they were conducting various experiments and measuring, how well the new architecture within the residual limb was working and how well they could get it to communicate with that mechatronic device. So it was, essentially many months of hanging out in the lab and watching some really interesting science being developed.
And from your point of view, Hugh, the relationship between a filmmaking team and, the people being filmed, that's a form of bilateral communication right there. So can you talk a bit about, what your initial thoughts, concerns, hopes for the project were when Matt and Gideon and the team came to talk to you?
Well, the obvious initial concern was that the film crew would be intrusive and would get in our way and, might even affect the outcome of the work. But in fact, they were there so frequently and were kind of in the background that at a certain point we forgot they were there, which was quite wonderful, and from a documentary perspective.
And that's kind of what you want as a filmmaker, right? I think you want to become invisible, excuse me, so you can capture these moments and know that those that are being filmed aren't reacting for the cameras, but they're just genuinely reacting the way they are. So that was critical. And I think my experience previously at the New York Times and also at STAT, sort of being a one-man band type of video producer, shooter, director, enabled me. I had some skills going in where I knew how to sort of make myself present to capture important moments, but not get in the way. That's what the ultimate goal was from my end.
Gideon, from your perspective, from the producer standpoint, what were some of the major challenges of this project? That's one question. And also, as I mentioned in the introduction, you have a biochemistry degree from Harvard. You also have a master's in journalism from Columbia. What were some of the challenges and opportunities with this story to kind of, tell the science and not dumb that down, but also tell a broader story that could reach more people?
Sure. So I'll start with your first question. I think one of the things about this story was that, as Matt just talked about, we started off with the idea that we were going to just tell the story about Jim Ewing's having this procedure done and then learning how to use this new limb and watching as it becomes part of himself, or as he feels it's becomes part of himself, which is what really drew me to this story to begin with, was this notion that a piece of metal and wiring can really feel like your own leg. As we got into the story and Matt began to see this as a much bigger story. And, originally we had previously worked together on a short film of about 35 minutes about the opioid crisis. And Matt started saying, I think there's a much bigger story here. Hugh's own background is crucial to telling the story. And I was thinking, well, you have a full-time job, and as do I at STAT, which is but the story that Matt was finding, it was so compelling that it was I had to say yes. We had to that we have to pursue this, even though it's going to be much more of a commitment of time and resources than we had initially thought. And then in terms of your second question, I think that was a really crucial issue for us as we thought about how to tell this story. When you're making a film and you don't actually know, like when we write a story for our news site, we know who our audience is. We didn't really know who the audience was going to be for this film because, is it going to be a mass audience, like a Hollywood film, or is it going to be a more narrow audience? And so we ended up, I think, trying to come down kind of in the middle where we wanted to get across the science concepts, but we didn't want the science. We wanted the story was so good and so compelling and such a powerful story that needed to be the real through line, and the science needed to be, and we wanted that to serve the science, to familiarize the audience with what the science is, what all these technological advances are, but it needed to be done seamlessly and not so that we got so deep into the science that we lose the story.
Well, I think you guys did a great job of striking that balance. So congratulations on that. Hugh, I'm curious, so much I'm sure of the work that you do is incremental in nature. You're making small breakthroughs, you're running up against problems and trying to just solve those problems along the way. But were there some kind of just aha moments, just real moments where you felt like this is an extraordinary breakthrough?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on that most days as a scientist are incremental and very frustrating. And sometimes you feel like you're going backwards, not forwards. But on occasion in a scientist's life, one has an extraordinary day where one witnesses something that's truly, truly inspiring and surprising. So with Jim Ewing, we had such a day. We had fitted the prosthesis on him, and we were measuring the neural signals from his AMI muscles and translating that to the control of the bionic limb. And at first he figured out how to move his toes up and down and his foot side to side, and we thought that was fantastic. And then Jim stood up, and what we observed was natural biomechanics mediated through the electromechanics as he traversed regular terrains like up and down steps and slopes and whatnot. His mechatronics just moved in a way that was natural and biological. And we asked Jim, are you trying to do that? And he said, no, I'm not trying to do anything. I'm simply walking up and down steps. And that was this aha moment where we saw with our own eyes what we hoped for in our wildest dreams, that if you give the nervous system information from the prosthesis. And if that information can be felt by the human via like natural sensations, the human brain knows exactly how to control the mechatronic device. Exactly. So just like when you walk up and down steps with your biological legs, your legs are doing all these fancy movements and stiffening and powering the gait. That's what occurred through the mechatronics, which was absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, it was exciting. You know, we tried in the film to get across both the sort of the everyday tedium of the lab. You know, you see the tinkering with the leg, and it doesn't work a lot of the time, and then it culminates in that moment that Hugh was just talking about.
Yeah,
to go on.
I love that you showed that progression. That was very, very effective.
I was just going to add as well to then, you know, Hugh's sort of brilliant idea to let's get Jim back to the Cayman Islands where he fell and, you know, build him a climbing foot and see, you know, if he can climb again there. And that was very powerful, I felt, you know, to be able to see that ankle, that climbing foot moving as if it was his own, I thought was remarkable.
Hugh, you know, near the end of the film, you describe yourself as being green with envy of Jim. And, you know, that you've met with Dr. Carty yourself to see what can be done for you. And then we also learned, you know, that Dr. Carty has received some funding to adapt the Ewing amputation for people like you who have had traditional amputations. You know, what's the latest with Dr. Carty's work, and what have you discussed with Dr. Carty that might be possible for you?
Yeah, so we, my MIT group, as well as Brigham and Women's Hospital, where Dr. Carty is a surgeon, we have many, many grants from DARPA, from the Army, from the NIH, to advance the neural interfacing. And there's a lot of exciting work underway. We are continuing to invent new strategies for surgical manipulation of tissues to enhance communication between the prosthesis and the nervous system. That's very, very exciting. And we're also developing new ways of measuring the mechanics of tissues to relate how the dynamic muscles are moving to the synthetic processors on the prosthesis. So one thing we're doing is we're implanting small magnetic beads into muscles. And then with electronics on the surface of the skin, we can track those beads and thereby track the movement of the muscles and have a direct master-slave control from the dynamic muscle pairs of the AMI to the bionic limb. What will I have in the future? I'm still trying to decide. Yeah, I certainly want the agonist-antagonist muscle interaction with the magnetic sensing. I may want also what's called osseointegration, which is a titanium shaft that goes into bone. And then you clamp the external prosthesis right to the titanium shaft. And that offers two things. One, you can transmit load to the skeleton, forces, so you can stand on your skeleton instead of through soft tissues. And secondly, you can run wires through the titanium implant from electrodes inside the body and sensors inside the body. So my guess is I'll have a combination of osseointegration with magnet tracking and these tissue constructs that we invented at MIT.
And in terms of scale, you know, there's a title card at the end that, you know, some of these innovations could benefit up to, you know, 500,000 people. So you know, maybe Matt or Gideon or you, Hugh, you know, what is the potential for that kind of scaling up to that extent? And also related to that, kind of mundane but important, you know, where are we with insurance coverage for all of this? Because that's ultimately, you know, where the rubber hits the road for most people.
Should I tackle that? So in the realm of amputation, solidly half the persons with amputation could benefit from the technique. In the US, there's solidly 2 million people with amputation. And globally, some estimates are it's about around 18 million people with amputation. So it's a lot more than 500,000 people if it was truly translated globally. And there's other types of conditions for which the work we're doing will be applicable, such as paralysis and whatnot. In terms of reimbursement, that's a difficult and frustrating topic, and it takes a lot of time to get technology reimbursed. But on the positive side, if one only does the surgery, it's possibly the case that insurance companies will reimburse the amputation surgery using normal standard mechanisms. So thus far, the AMI procedure has been applied to over 20 people, and all individuals have been covered by normal, regular insurance. Now, as soon as we put mechatronics on the person and inside the body, then if those technologies are novel, then you have a tremendous reimbursement hurdle, and it takes solidly a decade typically to get a new technology reimbursed broadly.
So we're in for a bit of a long haul here.
I was just going to, I was just wondering, Hugh, particularly, do you expect the Ewing amputation, or is it your hope that it would become sort of the standard of care in terms of how amputations are done for everyone in the future? I do. And now we're developing the capabilities to do it, to apply the AMI procedure, not only for planned amputations, but also for revisions. So a revision would be done, for example, in my case, my limbs are already amputated. So we're developing the capability of going in surgically and connecting the muscles in a natural way once again. Because these surgical procedures are currently being covered by standard insurance, we are hopeful that this can scale rapidly, which is very, very exciting. And the magnet tracking that will enable us to really measure what the muscles are doing directly in a high bandwidth way is minimally invasive. We're just injecting in small passive beads. Any nurse in any closet can put the beads in muscle. It doesn't take a lot of sophistication. And because of that minimally invasive character, we're hopeful that we'll get FDA approval and reimbursement in a timely fashion. So when you combine these surgical techniques with these novel ways of measuring muscle dynamics, I predict we're going to have a clinical step function in care in the realm of amputation. It'll truly be exciting. Imagine a person with arm amputations playing a Mozart piece on the piano. Imagine a person with leg amputation dancing with complex ballet movements. These are the things that I believe are achievable when combining novel surgery with novel implantations and controls.
So one last question, and Hugh, I'm going to give you a different question than the other two. For you, Hugh, I wanted to ask, we didn't have a chance to really talk about the part of the film that covers your accident and the aftermath. But, what we do see in the film is that, after you learn that, Albert Dow died in the rescue attempt that saved you and your climbing partner, you made a vow, to make something of your life and to do whatever you could to make a difference in the world. And, it's one thing to make such a vow. It's another to go on to achieve, what you have achieved. And obviously the film, it has to compress, some of the biographical details. So my question is, what were some of the major challenges, or maybe, pick one or two that you faced along the way, and just, did you ever doubt yourself once you got started on that path?
Yeah, there was tremendous challenges, as you can imagine. I remember very early on when I was attempting to climb again with artificial limbs, and I would, redesign current prostheses for the vertical world. And of course, not all designs work. And, you'd build a prototype in the shop and then go out in the rock face and it wouldn't work at all. And I remember just having basically adult tantrums and just screaming into the air. Of course I was alone and crying and, but you pick yourself up and you get some sleep, and the next day is a new day and you carry on. I believe I was very fortunate that I had the insight to recognize that what's not here today technologically, what's not possible today, will probably be possible tomorrow. That's the fundamental nature of technology, human creativity, innovation, that things change in time, and that we as humans can have a hand in that change and can, in fact, cause the change in the world. As opposed to viewing the body and technology as invariant, fixed in time, what a depressing thought that would be. And had I adopted that, I perhaps would have given up.
And Gideon and Matt, in the brief time we have left, what's one thing, or what's the one thing you'd like people to take away from your movie?
I would say that, especially in the times we're currently living in, with this global pandemic wreaking havoc, if you're able to harness science and really, put in the work, anything is achievable. And, spending time with Hugh and the folks in his lab, I mean, it's, we have a lot of brilliant scientists in this country who can do incredible things. So I know we're living sort of in a pretty, difficult time at the moment, but I have faith in science, and that we'll get through this challenging period. And also, I think Hugh's story is an important story because it's a story about, rising out of tragedy and making something of your life and doing incredibly important work. And I think, who can't relate to that?
Yeah, all of what Matt said. And I think also the other thing I would add is, I'd like people to think about, part of our goal in telling this story was to force people to reckon with the technological changes that are coming and what that might mean for society, for our views of disability. Hugh talks very eloquently about, making the whole notion of disability disappear. And that's a really terrific goal, because it, we all want to get there, but there are also implications what that all might mean for society, and we want people to begin to wrestle with that.
Well said, and I want to thank all of you for being with us today and congratulate you on the film. Matt, Gideon, and Hugh, thank you so much. And Hugh, just, thank you for the great work that you and your lab are doing. It's truly inspirational, and it's making the world a better place. And so thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
And to our audience, just please do spread the word about Augmented and tell your friends. It's an amazing film, as I'm sure you've seen, and thank you for joining us today.